Welcome to St. Pete Summit Retreat and public presentation, which is happening right now with Richard Gage, AIA. This is the house that Gage built, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And that's why we're here along with the Truth Action Project. I want to welcome you all to Central Florida in Pinellas County and St. Petersburg and the Bay Area. And I have Mr. Chris Steiner here from We Are Change Tampa Bay and Tampa 9/11 Truth. Say hello. Thank you.
Thanks for showing up, everybody. I want to let you know that we have a We Are Change chapter here in the Tampa Bay area at wearechangetampa.org, where you can connect to a lot of different causes, a lot of left and right, middle, and all perceived ends of the political spectrum. Check out our links page and documentaries page. You can spend weeks there. So check out our meetup group. While it lasts, we might just take it down and consolidate it into the website, but we have a lot of big plans with the help of Jason King, who also helped organize this wonderful event. So I'll, without further ado, I think that Richard Gage is why we're here. And Richard, I think you'll impress us and wow us as much as you always do. Let's hear it for Richard.
That's right. Mr. Richard Gage, a 20-plus year architect from the San Francisco Bay Area of California, joins us here in the Tampa Bay area of Central Florida. And he is one of my best friends. So come take it away, Mr. Richard Gage.
Thank you, Mikey.
Pleasure's mine.
Thanks so much. I am an architect of 28 years now, and I've been practicing with architecture firms for that long, mostly in the Bay Area. And about 10 years ago, almost now, I became aware of an alternative theory of what happened to the World Trade Center towers when I heard David Ray Griffin on the radio being interviewed by KPFA's Bonnie Faulkner of Guns and Butter. An extraordinary interview, and I had never heard anything about how these towers might have come down before this point in my life, and I was just shocked. And I'm going, this is incredible. This has to be, he has to be lying. But this is David Ray Griffin. If any of you have ever heard him, it's this elderly gentleman who's now written 10 books on the subject of 9/11. And he doesn't come off like a liar, you know. He's impeccable with his logic. He's grandfatherly. I had to find out if this is true. He was speaking that night at the Grand Lake Theater, and I went and saw to see him. There was 600 people packed into that audience before I got there, and I was not allowed in. There was no room. And so I had to go home and watch this on live stream. So I was late, and the stream was horrible. But anyway, in a few months, I figured out by my own research and finding Stephen Jones online and others, and finding out there was a third tower that came down on 9/11. I'm going, well, I would have heard about this if that were true. So this is why I am singularly going to take you on the rapid e-ticket ride through World Trade Center Building 7. I'm very excited to do that. And so without further ado, here we go. How many of you believe this tower came down by the official story, which says that fire brought it down, and we'll go through that. How many of you are unsure, not having seen the evidence yet, and how many of you already agree perhaps that this building came down by explosive controlled demolition? First, the official story, normal office fires. Jim, you think this? No, I can't get a serious audience here. Okay, how many of you are unsure? You've heard a few things. You're here to check out what this controversy is about. The Building 7, you're unsure how it came down. One? Just one? Okay. How many of you think this building came down by controlled demolition? All right, the rest of you. Well, you're going to see why this is the case. Normally, I'll ask this question for all three towers. Now, John, I'm going to encourage to ask this question for the Twin Towers, Because some of you, like me 10 years ago, might already think you know how the towers came down, like I did. Of course, they came down by gravitational collapse because of all that jet fuel in those planes. Oh my God. John will tell you more about that. First of all, we're going to learn something about this third tower. And we have a website. We're going to go very fast. You can go to the website. You can find the videos there and on YouTube. Google Solving the Mystery, WTC7. In 15 minutes, you'll get, you can show your friends basically this presentation. We're going to talk about the scientific method a lot tonight. We start with a question. How did the tower or towers come down? We do some background research, make some observations, construct our hypothesis, our best guess as to how the towers came down. We test that hypothesis with experiments, we draw conclusions, report the results in an open, transparent manner, and guess what? If the hypothesis is corroborated, we report the results. We don't hide our work like NIST did, not revealing the computer input data, which they used this computer model to prove their theory about how this tower came down, but it's not open. It's a black box. You can't see what their assumptions were. Well, if the hypothesis is not corroborated, the scientific method tells us to go back and construct a hypothesis that stands a better chance against the data. Okay, we've got this. We learned it in 7th grade. Let's apply it. Let's find out by some background research, how have buildings been destroyed? Well, fire has destroyed some buildings. Never a skyscraper, though not in the 100-year history of skyscrapers. We had maybe 100 very hot, large, and long-lasting fires in these skyscrapers. But say in a wood frame building, we might have a fire burns, or in an office building. Every 20 minutes or so in a given area, it's out of fuel. It moves on looking for fresh new fuel sources. So when a building comes down due to fire, it'll fall over. Gradually, an asymmetrical organic process. It won't go straight down through the path of greatest resistance, through the, in some cases, 40,000 tons of structural steel, as if it weren't even there. We'll come back to that. But there's several fires, as I mentioned, in Los Angeles, 3.5 hours over 5 floors, didn't collapse. Philadelphia, 18 hours it burned over 8 floors, no collapse. Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors, no collapse. Okay, let's look at buildings that collapsed due to earthquakes, because these are natural causes. The building doesn't pulverize into dust. You can see the remains of a building. Its structural elements aren't separated or dismembered one from another. Okay, so let's keep these different forms of destruction in mind because we're going to be comparing them to what happened at World Trade Center 7. These buildings are destroyed by explosions. We have thick, billowing, enormous pyroclastic-like clouds, like from a volcano, where there's a thick, solid edge with cauliflower shapes unfolding, indicating very hot chemical reactions from the explosives. And we have witnesses that hear those explosions. We have witnesses that see those bright light flashes. So if we have these features, we know we have explosions. Keep this in mind, because guess what? Explosions can be harnessed in thousands of cutter charges placed throughout the columns and beams in the building, and then they detonate them in a sequence, bringing buildings like this down. We have hundreds of examples of these controlled demolitions to draw our conclusions from, or at least to do some basic background research. So what are these typical features? Well, we have a sudden onset of destruction, usually at the base of the structure, straight down symmetrical collapse through the thousands of tons of structural steel, because these demolition waves remove the column supports. Free fall acceleration straight down through the path of what was the greatest resistance, 40,000 tons of structural steel in some of these buildings, resulting also in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. Remember, that doesn't happen in a natural collapse. Minimal damage to adjacent structures, that's the goal at least. Witnesses hear sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. Enormous pyroclastic-like clouds of pulverized concrete and squibs, or isolated explosive ejections occurring that are obviously explosions. Maybe they're going off at the wrong time here or there. There's chemical evidence left behind, also the residue of explosives in the dust. If you have these features, you know you have direct evidence of explosive destruction. And guess what? Fire can't cause any of these, let alone all 10 of them. Fire being the cause, according to NIST, of the destruction of Building 7. We'll come back to that. Government documentation can be helpful. Experts agree, at least those who don't have $100,000 contracts with the federal government, causing their opinion about what may or may not be an explosive demolition to be unbiased. But we will be looking for those who don't have such contracts and get their opinion. Foreknowledge, we know in advance that these buildings are coming down sometimes if we're told, or if it leaks. And video documentation is all proof of controlled demolition. With that in mind, let's take a look at World Trade Center 7, a 47-story skyscraper, half the height of the Twin Towers, easily dominated in the skyline by these, but this would be the highest building in most of our states. Now, this building was not hit by an airplane. So we're not talking about jet fuel and plane impacts. That's what makes it a classic, beautiful, isolated example on 9/11, because that's when it came down at 5:20 in the afternoon. We can see and apply this experiment tonight. It's rather clean. The structure was built over the Con Edison substation, so there was some unusual structure. But NIST says this is not a part of the official theory of their destruction. So tonight we'll ignore the lower structure there, and we'll start to look at what happened to this building. Here it is, surviving the impacts of some beams that did hit it when the towers went down. But it stands fine, and NIST says that impact was insignificant in the building's collapse. So we have some features associated with Building 7's destruction, and let's see if they match those features of a controlled demolition, beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, let's take a look and listen to Dan Rather.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Well, that's very helpful insight on Dan Rather's part. We didn't hear him again, though, repeat those words. In fact, we haven't seen Building 7 in the last 10 years on TV except for 2 or 3 occasions, here or there. Geraldo Rivera reported, or at least showed this building as he interviewed one of our engineers and one of our family members, one of the 9/11 victim family members. Do we have a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint? Let's watch from West Street. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. Remember, natural collapses do not do this. And we'll talk about why. I'm still not convinced though yet. Let's take a look with Building 7 on the left, a known controlled demolition series of them on the right. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? But NIST never even examined this possibility. In fact, it should have been the first, if not the only possibility that they looked at, since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, and no fire has ever brought down a skyscraper in history. And we're talking about these fires. These are the worst fires that we have video or photographic evidence of. And the worst ones occurring on the 12th and 13th floor, the floor occupied by the Securities and Exchange Commission, which lost thousands of files related to hundreds of critical cases like Enron and WorldCom that it was pursuing against those Wall Street companies. The fires, according to NIST, are heavy at 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock, right around column 79. But the videos and the photos prove that by 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, there in fact were no fires, as we show in our simulation. So the NIST's theory is completely out to lunch without proof, without fires burning on those floors. Why? Because with the fires burned out on these floors by 3:50, over an hour before, then they can't have their theory, which relies on expansion of beams during the fire to cause the collapse. Expansion of beams around this column, 79. These beams, which are said to have expanded by the fire, pushing this girder off of its seat on this column, 79, and then causing the collapse of floor 13 onto 12, 12 onto 10, so on for 9 floors, making this column unsupported for 9 stories, and then it buckles and then causes the interior collapse of this portion of the building, and then an interior instability travels laterally across the building, and then the whole building comes down as you saw in the video. So none of that could be true for a whole variety of reasons. Chiefly, these beams are fire protected. They could not have even gotten to the temperatures which would have caused their expansion. But had that happened, they couldn't expand because they're tied into shear studs to the concrete floor up above, which NIST manipulates the destruction of by heating up the beams in 1.5 seconds, but not heating the concrete above them, causing this differential expansion, which causes these shear studs or pins to pop. They also ignore the shear studs on top of this girder, allowing it to slide sideways. They also ignore a stiffener at the end of this girder, which would have kept it from sliding anywhere. And there's a number of other reasons it can't have worked, which we won't go into now. But look at the computer model that they produce on the right, timed perfectly with the actual video, and you see no similarity. This building, their own computer model begins to tip over. They can't even mimic what happened in reality in the video. Also, you can see 400 structural steel connections failing every second. Fires, natural collapses don't do that. You have to do that by letting those connections fail in the computer that fast in order to bring this building down that fast, and still they can't bring it down symmetrically, their own computer model. It's pretty telling. They disproved their own theory. What you would have seen is massive cascading and bulging like you see here at the bottom in their computer model, but the video of course shows no bulging. If this building was caving in from the inside, you'd see massive perimeter deformation of the perimeter columns and breaking of windows on a massive scale, and granite panels as well, none of which you see. How do we bring a building down straight into its own footprint? Well, you have to take out all 82 columns in this building at once, virtually, on each given floor, synchronistically timed. How can fire be that precise? It can't. It's completely disproved by this fact alone. Every fact we're giving you disproves the official story. Why are we focusing on this? Because, we'll get to that. How fast does the building come down? Well, you can see it gaining additional distance every second. That's acceleration. It fits the acceleration curve perfectly. It's as if we removed 8 stories, because that's the distance over which this building falls at free fall. What is free fall? I'm going to drop this pen. 3, 2, 1. That's free fall. Why? No resistance underneath the pen. It can fall freely. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel resisting it. In fact, it's 5 times stronger than it needed to be. For the life of that building, where did those columns go? All at once. They had to have been removed. In fact, NIST acknowledges, finally, the free fall of this building. They don't acknowledge the implications of that, which are that those columns had to have been removed, resulting in the total dismemberment of that steel structure. 47-story steel frame, moment-resisting structural steel system, falling like a house of cards. The only way that can happen is if those structural connections of the steel were severed. Remember, buildings that fall naturally, you see a building mangled, certainly at the bottom. The structural or concrete system is not completely dismembered. Do we have witnesses that heard sounds of explosions?
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds, you heard explosions. Like, boom! It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
I'm going to call in Bill Rosati. He was here when it all happened. He saw it for himself. Bill, if you can just tell us what you saw, what you heard.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What sort of sound?
Like a boom, like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, "You have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run."
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
NIST did not acknowledge any of these witnesses of explosions or this explosion that you just heard, along with these firefighters. There's not one report of explosions for the Twin Towers or Building 7 in the official reports. Why not? If any of these buildings were to fall due to fire, you'd expect it to be this one, which is fully engulfed in flames, right? World Trade Center 5. Did it fall? No. Mid-rises or high-rises, skyscrapers, don't fall due to fires. They don't collapse. Or maybe this one in China, fully engulfed, top to bottom, 40 stories in this hotel. 2009, this building was on fire. Did it collapse? No. Before, after, slightly toasted around the edges, still in commission. Because these buildings are fireproofed. But even in tests show that even without fireproofing, these buildings, the structure might sag these beams in very, very hot fires, 2,000 degrees, which these buildings didn't sustain anything more than 500 degrees. Most likely, NIST has no evidence of temperatures hotter than that in the steel. But these fires are said to have brought this building down in 6.5 seconds into a pile like a house of cards, just 6 stories tall. Should have been a 20-story tall fire. What about the FEMA report? We had several reports. FEMA got $600,000 worth of funding. And still, what did they conclude? Let's take a look. The specifics of the fire, they say, and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown. Our best hypothesis, fire plus random damage, has only a low probability of occurrence. Wait, what do you do when your best hypothesis has a low probability of occurrence? You go back and you find one that has a higher probability of occurrence. But that wasn't done. They say further research, investigation, and analysis are needed to resolve this issue. Unfortunately, though, for those hoping to resolve the issue, we had 400 truckloads a day within 2 weeks removing all of the steel from Building 7 and destroying it, saving only a couple of pieces for analysis. Prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, crucial evidence that could answer the question. It's on the slow boat to China. It was sent to be recycled. Astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. What do the experts say? Again, those who aren't tied to the federal system. of nursing off the teat of our taxpayer dollars. But we do have Danny Joinko, a 27-year controlled demolition expert, top European controlled demolition expert. He says it starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. He's shown this video after 9/11, not being told that this building came down on 9/11, and he's giving his advice. This is controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. Professional work, without a doubt. Well, what is some of our structural engineers? We have 79 structural engineers signed on to our petition among 2,400 architects and engineers. Like Kamal Obeid from Berkeley, a localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. Well, that's helpful. Is there foreknowledge of this building's destruction? Listen to these construction workers. They're walking away from building 7. They hear an explosion, look back over their shoulder at the building, and then straight into the CNN camera and say this.
You hear that?
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
All right, guys? Sorry.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame, debris coming down.
Wow, the building's, how do they know the building's about to blow up? Well, they're told that there's some structural damage, and that's why the firefighters weren't allowed in the building to put it out. And they're all expecting the building to come down, and it just doesn't seem to come down until the right moment. What did Kevin McPadden say prior to his last statement? He and everybody else has moved back 6 blocks away from the building, expecting it to come down, and he hears a voice on the radio, held in the hands of a Red Cross worker, and this is what he hears.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? Something else is going on here. Here's Jane Stanley knew about it, announced the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it ever happened. And they have the reason also, due to structural weakening when the towers went down, they say. They apologize for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. Does this make them psychic? Better than that, CNN is on the job at 10:45 that morning.
In New York, Alan Dobbs-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Aaron, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon.
This is a lot of detail for something that didn't happen yet. It wasn't going to happen for 7 more hours. If that building had come down at that time, we wouldn't even have videos of it because it would have been obscured by the massive dust cloud created when the Twin Towers went down 15 minutes earlier. Some people suggest that it was a dud and speculate that these construction workers were going into the building to fix it and come out. Well, in the afternoon, the building had some fires in it too, so risky business. What about extreme heat or evidence of cutter charges? Guess what? Bechtel documents 2,800 degree temperatures. Fires don't get that hot, folks. These are hydrocarbon fires, normal office fires according to NIST. They don't produce more than 500, 1,000 degrees. At the very worst, maybe 1,500 degrees. We have no evidence of such heat. That's half of the documented temperatures. Molten steel, pools of it, says Peter Tully, the president of the construction. And these witnesses, what are they documenting?
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like lava.
There's quite a problem with this eyewitness testimony because normal office fires don't melt steel either. There's something that can, though. We're going to be taking a look at it. As you see here, molten metal falling. It turns out to be molten iron. We're going to see where that comes from. But they say partially evaporated steel beams. This takes 4,000 degree temperatures. What can produce 4,000 degrees? A fire can only produce a quarter of that. It did melt the beams, according to Abulhaz and Astani, who had unlimited access to the Fresh Kills landfill to document this. Doesn't know what it is, though. He's never seen melted steel. He's a structural engineer, not a metallurgist. He says, not my department. I only care what happened when the building was standing, not what happened in the, but something caused this to happen, and it's very well documented in Appendix C of the original FEMA report that came out in May of 2002. And guess what? We're talking about very hot corrosion capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese like this one you see here, with rapid oxygen, intergranular melting, liquid iron. Here's where the documentation of molten iron comes from, in addition to several other sources, by FEMA. Hot sulfur formed. Where does the sulfur come from? Sulfur is added to thermite, becomes thermate. This is hot molten concrete and fused metal.
One of the more unusual artifacts to emerge from the rubble is this rock-like object that has come to be known as the meteorite.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat. And architects, engineers, people who work with steel, welders have just never seen the level of destruction and the level of deformation of this material in our lives.
And most of this applies to the Twin Towers as well, which you see here, the North Tower and the South Tower. Building 7 up here, all of whom have hot spots on the surface measured that are hotter than fires can get normally. There's no fuel on the surface of these fires. This is steel and other metal parts. The fires were deep down below. So if the surface temperature is 1,300 degrees, the source of that, which is way down below, must be twice that. And in fact, as we mentioned, Bechtel documents exactly that. In fact, what can produce temperatures much hotter than the office fires, 1,200 degrees here is suggested by Thomas Eiger, official story supporter. Structural steel doesn't even melt until 2,700, 2,800 degrees. We're going to be looking at thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Produces 4,500 degree temperatures, easily explaining the evidence that you've just seen. But is there evidence in the rubble pile of that material? Indeed, Dr. Stephen Jones and others have found it. Here's what it is.
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Interesting, we might be getting somewhere now. We've got a source, a possible source of the incredible heat. We got a possible source for the sulfur, which is unexplained by officials. Fascinating. What does the NFPA 921, the guide for explosion and fire investigation, say? Look for unusual residues that could rise from thermite. Gosh, NIST acknowledges it did not look for explosives or incendiaries, and they refuse to do so still. But others have, like Dr. Stephen Jones, who finds it plentifully on the steel samples from the sculptures that exist still around the country. This is an oxyacetylene cut, which is done at the site by ironworkers. This is something else entirely, with molten aluminum also found on the edges. And these sculptures are riddled with it, and tests show the evidence of thermite. There are devices that will do this. You don't have to have a patent, although I will show you a patented device. It can be made in your backyard. Now don't try this at home. John will tell you why. John did this in his backyard, and guess what? A piece of that steel is sitting back there. Mike, stand up and show him that steel. In fact, bring it up here if you wouldn't mind. It's incredible. Razor sharp edges, just like officials from FEMA find in the analysis of the piece of steel that you saw here. They have no explanation for the severe hot temperature corrosion with sulfur residue there. Thank you very much, Mike. Let's give a big hand for Mikey. Now, what we'd like Mikey to do is bring you a piece of steel from that had the effect of this thermetic cutter charge, which is designed and patented prior to 2001, which will send hot molten iron through structural steel in milliseconds, much more effective even than the high energy explosives like C4 and RDX. Remember, this is a deceptive controlled demolition. They don't want us to know the loud sound signature of a bang or the bright flash associated with high energy explosives, so they had to use something else. Could have just that patent. Well, is there any evidence of that device or that material actually used at the World Trade Center? R.J. Lee and the USGS does their own study of the dust, their toxicological studies. It's not conspiracy theorists. What do they find? Molten iron droplets, previously molten iron, the diameter of a human hair, billions of them in all the dust samples found by them, the USGS, Stephen Jones, others have found this material also, like this experiment here. You can see how they're produced. The thermite goes off. It burns very, very hot, turning iron oxide into molten iron droplets, as you see here. And this is what they find in all the dust. Officials find it. We don't make this stuff up. Could that explain the toasting of the tops of these cars? Liquid molten iron falling. Hot, hot, hot clouds that people are running from down at ground zero. Well, what else was found in the dust? Any evidence of unignited thermite? If that was residue of ignited thermite, well, Niels Harrit and 8 other scientists document ultimately 4 of their samples independently collected from this dust, including from this apartment by Jeanette McKinley. Well, they find the same curious red-gray chips in all the dust samples. This one's 1/16 of an inch long. It's the largest. They're real tiny red-gray chips. By extrapolation, they find about 10 tons of this material. If you calculate how much there would be in all the dust spread 3 square miles in a 4-inch thick average blanket across lower Manhattan. Well, they do a study and they find iron, silica, aluminum, oxygen, carbon, the ingredients of thermite, the signature of thermite. Fascinating. The red layer they zoom into 50,000 times with an electron microscope. What do they find? Particles of iron oxide in crystal form and wafers of aluminum platelets 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of the human hair. Nanoscale particles. These should not be there. This is evidence of nanotechnology. This stuff is extremely effective. It's set in an organic bed of oxygen, silica, carbon. So you have an incendiary that's engineered to become more explosive. We don't know how explosive. We do know that it ignites at 420 degrees in their actual experiments that they did, which compares to the experiments that was done in the documented results by Lawrence Livermore Lab, Los Alamos Lab. When they ignite, they produce what? the molten iron spheres, which have the same characteristics or similar enough to prove that it is indeed the same stuff that was found by R.J. Lee, the molten iron spheres, in all the dust samples. Thus we know where the spheres came from. As if we didn't know, they are found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips as well in the dust, as you see. This is called superthermite, nanothermite. It's been documented very well because of the extremely small size you see. You have an incredible surface area which ignites almost instantaneously across the body of the material. That's where it gets much of its explosion capability and the gases that are expanding from the carbon material in which it's set. So this is a very high-tech process, not made in a cave in Afghanistan. So we can begin to get an idea, and indeed Kevin will share with you who some of the manufacturers are of this material, and it's just fascinating. We got a source for a real investigation, but you can see how this self-corroborating evidence is repeatable in experiment, and the arbitrator of competing hypothesis, as our friend John Cole tells us, it could put a lot of people away, this evidence, and this documented peer-reviewed paper, 24 pages in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, for treason for a long, long time. So the question I have to leave with you is, does the hypothesis of controlled demolition, is it corroborated by the evidence? So I just wanted to ask you that question. Maybe no, maybe unsure, maybe yes. How many no's do we have? How many think this building, in other words, came down, according to the official story, by normal office fires? Maybe you're unsure still. Who's unsure? And one, thank you. And how many think this building came down by controlled demolition? Which would prove what? Let's take a quick look. It would prove that we've been lied to by NIST at the very least. It would probably also prove or cause us to suspect that a group of operatives got into this building to set these explosives. John is going to give you some incredible evidence for the same or similar in the World Trade Center towers. John's a civil engineer from right here in Florida, Sarasota. John Cole, please come up. Good job, man. Thank you. You're all set.